What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Off the Top Rope, Off the Mic Sports Network. So, wanted to get into obviously the uncomfortable stories that have come out of SummerSlam. WWE's kind of brought this on themselves, but as I've said, they don't give a shit. So that's really the reality of the situation. But let's get into some topics here, what you guys kind of expect from me. Somebody who I haven't talked about in about a month is Mercedes Mone. She's going to be returning to AEW on Wednesday. It's going to be the first time that we've seen her on television since the loss to Toni Storm at All in Texas. And I gotta give credit to a Twitter guy that I follow. Some people will probably hate him, Jason G from SAT, who is at Life for a Oneer. And he's always like, he's never hidden his opinion about everything. But one thing that he posted was he basically said, tribalism or not, tribalism aside, who's having the better 2025? Naomi or Mercedes Mone? And I know what you guys are going to expect me to do. You're going to expect me to shit all over Mercedes because I literally have spent a lot of this year shitting all over some of the reputation that she has built within professional wrestling with all the wins that she stacked up. But then, I kind of backtracked my opinion a little bit because I got to give credit where credit is due. The woman laid down and, took a loss on the biggest stage that AEW has and put over Toni Storm. That being said, I don't know if Toni Storm necessarily needed it to validate herself. And then I started to think to myself in the aftermath of that, I was like, Mercedes has really had a good year and from a wrestling perspective. But at the same time, that's what we expect from her. That's what we've always expected from Mercedes Mone. When she went to AEW, I was thrilled because this is, in my eyes, bell to bell, one of the best female wrestlers maybe ever. There's a damn good argument, and I know a lot of people will probably disagree with me on that opinion, but she is spectacular between those ropes. She really is. I don't like that she's taken a lot of wins, and it got to a goofy point to the extent that it really bothered me in AEW. But when it came down to doing business on the biggest stage that AEW has, despite how it was booked to get there, and some of this is on Tony Khan as well, she laid down, stared up at the lights, and took a pinfall from Toni Storm, which to me puts the stamp of approval on timeless Toni Storm, who has been there grinding her ass off and getting that character over to make her the standard of this division was a big statement in my eyes. So in that respect, I got to give credit where credit is due to Mercedes. But that being said, I feel like she could do more. And, in terms of elevating this division, because my problem with why she has, been to where she is like nobody's over and nobody, and, in terms of like, her going to that division, we knew she was going to be the top of this division to begin with. So when you make this comparison, and like I said, I give credit to, Jason on Twitter, basically throwing this out there, who's having the better year? Because if you guys remember, around 3 years ago to the day, it was probably around May, June, or somewhere like that, Naomi and Mercedes walked out of WWE over bad booking. Naomi ended up revitalizing herself, and to the point where she became a TNA Knockouts champion. She got back into WWE, became a tag team champion. And then this whole idea for this heel turn where a lot of people were wondering what this was going to look like. And here we are sitting here early August, and Naomi is maybe the best thing in women's wrestling right now, in my opinion. The character's unbelievable. Her wrestling has been unbelievable. She got to walk to the ring with her father. How fucking cool is that? She gets to walk to the fucking ring with her father at SummerSlam in front of 50,000 people. That's freaking awesome. She had maybe one of the greatest cash-ins, male or female, in the history of this business. The only person that I could honestly think of that maybe has had a better two cash-ins is Seth Rollins. There's a couple other people that maybe you can make the argument for, Edge, his initial cash-in. But in terms of women, Naomi's got the best cash-in. So if you're asking me gun to my head, who's having the better year right now, like you could honestly say, hey, Mercedes is having a great year. But if you look at her year totality, what has she done? Yeah, she's gone worldwide, gone global, and won a bunch of indie championships, and she's Mercedes, what, 8 belts and 8 belts Monet. But isn't that what we expect from Mercedes? Is we expect her to, look good in the ring? We expect her to, be the standard, be the franchise, be everything. That's what we expect Mercedes to do. But what has she done differently from what we expected? In my eyes, her character's not that great. It's in a lot of ways, some people will say it's like an elevated version of the Sasha Banks character, but it's like, no, the CEO has not been over with the fans. A lot of people don't really identify with it unless you're on the internet. Naomi, what Naomi has done this year is something that is really hard in the professional wrestling industry. She has completely and utterly reinvented herself into her best form. I've been saying for years to my sister, who loves and adores Trinity for her time on Total Divas, I've been saying for years that Naomi is one of the most underappreciated talents, not just in the women's division, in the entire fucking world. And you saw that in TNA, that she was great, bell to bell with people like Jordan Grace and Deonna Purrazzo, and just, elevating her craft to the point of she was even, and even before that, she was a great wrestler. She just never got the opportunity to shine. Like the women's championship that she won at Evolution, that's her first championship in 8 years. She hadn't been on SummerSlam since that point. Like that's how long it had been for Naomi. She had been a glorified throw her into the tag team division. And, before this heel turn, she probably been, hey, she would have been the perfect person to be like, women's Intercontinental or women's United States champion. She is now a bona fide main eventer. Bona fide main eventer. And her character work has been unbelievable. This proceed with caution thing is so effing good. It's been unbelievable. And, her evil laugh, her intentionally mispronouncing Stephanie Vaquer's name, everything about this. And then on top of it, she put over Jade Cargill twice, even though say what you will about Jade Cargill, she did good business and lost, and then got her crowning moment, which to me is the women's moment of the fucking year in my eyes. You could say what you will about that match at WrestleMania with Io, Bianca, and Rhea. It was an unbelievable match. The one thing that I'm going to remember from this year in terms of women's wrestling is Naomi cashing in that briefcase to end Evolution. She was what ended one of the WWE's best shows of the year. And then on top of it, all of the hard work that she's been putting in has now paid off. She gets to, be in there with two of WWE's best women to kick off SummerSlam and gets to walk to the ring with her father. That's freaking awesome. So I think both of these women have had great years. But if you're asking me who's had the better year, and a lot of people are going to take this out of context and think like, Mike, you're using this as another vehicle to shit on Mercedes. I'm like, no. I think her time away has, kind of like, made me evaluate and say like, yeah, she's had a really good year. She's had consistently really good bangers. Yes. Do I like that she's been walking around with 7, 8 championships? I think that's fucking ridiculous. She doesn't need that to validate her career, but she's done that, and good for her. But Naomi was a tag team champion earlier this year. She then has this iconic heel turn, ends up losing at WrestleMania. She loses at Evolution. She wins Money in the Bank. And then, like I said, best women's cash-in that I've ever seen. And nobody deserves it more, because that woman has had to put up with a bunch of nonsense. And these two women are always going to be attached at the hip because they're friends, outside of the world. But I give Naomi a ton of credit for betting on herself and coming back in. And in that respect, I think she's had a better year than her great friend Mercedes Mone. That being said, Mercedes has had a really good year. No matter how I feel personally about how some of the booking decisions that have been made around her, and I think that, some of her ego has gotten to her head a little bit. Still, she's a great fucking wrestler. She really is. I think so. I think some of the run here in AEW has kind of, hurt my perception of her but that's not going to take away from who I think she is in terms of, in terms of what this business is about from a women's perspective. Women's wrestling is not where it is without her. And a lot of that has to do with Naomi. So I know for a fact that Mercedes is grinning ear to ear that her friend is as successful as she is right now. And being able to come back to WWE and be at the top of that women's division that is as good as it's ever been, and to, have the opportunities that she's had. To me, Naomi's had the better year. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. I love Stephanie Vaquer. I hope she doesn't beat her in Paris. A lot of people are going to be mad at me about that. I hope Naomi holds on to that title for a while. I really hope she does, because she's been freaking amazing. Really, since she got back to WWE in 2024. And then even they used the overshadowing part of the whole thing with the Glow to get her out of what was a popular gimmick in the Glow and made her into an even better character. That's why I think Naomi's had a better year. And her wrestling's not that bad either. I've always thought she's underappreciated. She had a pretty damn good match at SummerSlam. So, anyway, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.